Bohemia incident. On April 22, 1934, FBI agents tracked John Dillinger to a lodge called Little Bohemia in Manitowish Waters, Wisconsin. Dillinger and his gang had been robbing banks across the Midwest for over a year. At least 24 banks, 10 people dead. He'd escaped from a jail in Crown Point, Indiana that everyone said was escape-proof, reportedly using a fake gun carved out of wood. Newspapers called him public enemy number one. Now the FBI finally had him surrounded. And then everything went wrong. 3 men walked out the front door. Agents opened fire. But the men weren't Dillinger's gang. They were regular customers leaving for the night. One was killed. Meanwhile, Dillinger and his entire crew slipped out through the back windows. Nobody had covered the rear exits. One of Dillinger's men, Babyface Nelson, killed an agent while escaping. And Dillinger wasn't even the only problem. Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow were robbing banks and killing people across the country at the same time. 13 dead, 9 of them cops. They drove stolen cars from state to state, and local sheriffs couldn't chase them past county lines. The FBI could only get involved because one of those stolen cars crossed a state line. Americans were reading about a new bank robbery almost every day. Congress had been debating the Federal Bank Robbery Act for months, but hadn't passed it. Then came Little Bohemia. Newspapers tore the FBI apart. Congress stopped debating and started voting. On May 18, 1934, the law passed. The FBI now had what it never had before: full jurisdiction over bank robbery. Dillinger was shot dead outside a Chicago theater 2 months later. Bonnie and Clyde died in a police ambush in Louisiana. By 1936, every major public enemy was dead or in prison, and the FBI had built the system that ended the gangster era: a fingerprint database that could link a suspect in Missouri to a robbery in Indiana, a crime lab that could match a bullet to a gun across state lines, a training academy that taught local cops how to work with the feds. That system is still running today, and it started with the FBI's biggest failure: the Great Brinks Robbery. On the night of January 17, 1950, 7 masked men walked into the Brinks building in Boston's North End. Brinks was one of the biggest armored car companies in the country, and the building held millions in cash. The men wore caps, peacoats, and rubber Halloween masks. They carried handguns, and they had keys to every door. For nearly 2 years, the gang had been sneaking in after hours, removing locks one at a time, having copies made, and putting the originals back before anyone noticed. That night, they tied up 5 employees and loaded over half a ton of cash into canvas bags. They were gone by 7:30. The total was $2.7 million, the largest robbery in American history at the time. The plan was to sit on the money and wait. Under the law, charges had to be filed within 6 years. If nobody talked, they'd all walk free. The FBI had almost nothing: a cap, some rope, no fingerprints, no witnesses. Agents had suspects, but no proof. The case went nowhere for years. The break came from inside the gang. Joseph Specs O'Keefe, one of the 11 men involved, went to prison on a separate charge. The deal had always been that the crew would take care of each other while they waited out the clock. So O'Keefe asked the others to help pay for his lawyer. They refused. O'Keefe kept pushing, and the crew saw him as a risk. If he got angry enough, he might talk. So they sent someone to kill him. O'Keefe survived. On January 6, 1956, he told the FBI everything. 5 days before the 6-year window closed. 8 men were convicted and got life in prison. Only $58,000 was ever found. After the robbery, the entire armored car industry changed. Brinks and every major competitor redesigned their locks, upgraded their alarms, tightened background checks, and built security systems that are still standard today. And for the FBI, the Brinks case became a playbook: long-term surveillance, pressure on the weakest link, waiting for someone to flip. The FBI still uses that playbook. It's how they took down the mob. It's how they break drug rings. The Brooklyn Bank Standoff. On August 22, 1972, a man named John Wojtowicz walked into a Chase Manhattan Bank in Brooklyn, New York, with a gun and tried to rob it. It went wrong almost immediately. Police showed up before he could leave. Wojtowicz panicked, grabbed 7 employees, and locked himself inside. For 14 hours, cops surrounded the building while thousands gathered outside. News crews showed up. Wojtowicz played to the crowd, stepping outside to yell at the cops while people treated him like a folk hero. But inside, 7 people were held at gunpoint. The standoff ended when Wojtowicz negotiated a car to the airport. FBI agents shot his partner during the ride. Wojtowicz was arrested. All 7 hostages walked out alive. But it took 14 hours with no training and no plan. And not every standoff ended that well. A year earlier, police stormed Attica prison during a riot. 43 people were killed, including 10 hostages. A month after Brooklyn, the Munich Olympics ended with all 11 Israeli hostages dead after a botched rescue. But those happened in a prison and on foreign soil. Brooklyn happened on a city street in front of news cameras, with thousands watching. An NYPD cop named Harvey Schlossberg had been studying these situations. Schlossberg also had a PhD in psychology, and he'd come to a simple conclusion. Time helps the negotiator. The longer a standoff goes, the less likely anyone dies. Instead of rushing in, police should slow things down, keep talking, and wear the hostage taker out. After Brooklyn, the NYPD gave him a chance. Lieutenant Frank Bowles built the department's first hostage negotiation team. The first class graduated in April 1973. The model was simple: lock down the area, control who goes in and out, and talk. The FBI adopted it the following year and started teaching it at their training center in Quantico. Then, city after city built their own teams. Before Brooklyn, police had one response to a hostage situation: go in. After Brooklyn, they had another option: talk. Today, hostage negotiation is standard in every major police department in America. The Norco Shootout. On May 9, 1980, 5 men walked into the Security Pacific Bank in Norco, California. Their leader was George Wayne Smith, a former soldier who believed nuclear war was coming. He needed money to prepare for the end of the world, so he decided to rob a bank. Smith's crew carried military-style rifles, shotguns, thousands of rounds, and homemade grenades. The average cop that day carried a .38 caliber revolver with 18 rounds. The robbery lasted 2 minutes, but a customer across the street called the police. When the robbers came out, Deputy Glenn Belaski was there. They opened fire. Over 200 rounds hit his cruiser. Belaski was shot in the face, shoulder, and both arms, but he fired back 4 times. One pellet flew through the gap between the driver's seat and headrest of the getaway van and hit 17-year-old Billy Delgado, killing him. The van crashed. The surviving robbers grabbed their guns, stole a pickup truck, and ran. What followed was a 25-mile gunfight through suburbs, freeways, and into the San Gabriel Mountains. They threw pipe bombs at the cops behind them. They shot down a helicopter. They damaged 33 police cars. As the chase crossed into San Bernardino County, officers from different agencies joined in, but they were on different radio systems. They couldn't talk to each other. The robbers drove until the road ran out at a dead end. They set up an ambush. Deputy James Evans, a Green Beret and father of 6, was the first around the corner. They shot and killed him before he could react. Deputy McCarty, right behind him, took a bullet to the elbow, but he'd grabbed an M16 from the evidence room before the chase. He slammed the magazine into a rock to force it in, stood up, and emptied half the clip. The robbers ran. The next morning, Smith was found crying for help in a puddle of his own blood. The end of the world he'd prepared for never came. After Norco, departments across Southern California went from owning 2 rifles to over 75. The push for shared radio systems between agencies started here too, but the rest of the country didn't listen. It would take another shootout 17 years later to finish what Norco started. The FBI Miami Shootout. On April 11, 1986, 14 FBI agents set up along South Dixie Highway in Miami. They were looking for 2 men who had been robbing banks and armored cars across South Florida for 6 months. 6 robberies, 1 guard killed. The FBI didn't know their names. They only knew what car they drove. That morning, agents Ben Grogan and Jerry Dove spotted it, a black Chevrolet Monte Carlo. Within minutes, multiple cars boxed the suspects in on a quiet residential street. The 2 men inside were Michael Platt and William Maddox, both former soldiers. They didn't surrender. Platt came out with a Ruger Mini 14 rifle. Maddox had a shotgun. The agents had .38 caliber revolvers and 9mm pistols. Most weren't wearing body armor. The fight lasted 5 minutes. Platt was hit early. Agent Dove put a 9mm round into his arm that traveled into his chest and stopped an inch from his heart. It should have killed him. It didn't. Platt kept fighting. He advanced on agents pinned behind cars trying to reload 5- and 6-round pistols while he fired 30 rounds per magazine. He killed Grogan. He killed Dove. 5 other agents were wounded. One had his arm nearly blown off. Another was shot in the neck and couldn't move. Agent Edmundo Morales, bleeding badly from his left arm, pulled himself up with a shotgun and then switched to his revolver. He walked toward Platt and Maddox and fired until both were dead. He was the first FBI agent ever awarded the Medal of Valor. Afterward, the FBI looked at what went wrong. Dove's 9mm didn't have the power to reach Platt's heart. That 1 inch was the difference. So the FBI stopped using revolvers. They moved to semi-automatic pistols. Body armor became mandatory. When the first replacement round, the 10mm, proved too hard for most agents to handle, Smith & Wesson built a new one from scratch, the .40 caliber S&W. It became the standard for thousands of police departments for the next 2 decades. The FBI also created a testing system for bullets that every ammunition maker in the country still designs around today. The North Hollywood Shootout. On the morning of February 28, 1997, two men walked into a Bank of America in North Hollywood, Los Angeles. Larry Phillips Jr. and Emil Matasareanu were carrying 5 rifles, some modified to fire automatically, and over 3,000 rounds of armor-piercing ammunition. Both wore homemade body armor. Phillips was covered neck to ankle. The officers who responded carried 9mm pistols and shotguns. A patrol car happened to pass the bank just as the two men walked in. By the time Phillips and Matasareanu came out, police had the building surrounded. Phillips opened fire. Officers shot back. Their rounds hit the robbers and did nothing. The homemade armor stopped everything. For 44 minutes, two men walked through the streets of North Hollywood, firing automatic weapons while cops crouched behind cars being torn apart by armor-piercing rounds. All of it broadcast live on television. Officers couldn't rescue the wounded because the gunfire was too heavy. They seized an armored truck to pull out injured cops. A group ran to a nearby gun shop and borrowed rifles just to match the robbers' firepower. SWAT arrived 18 minutes in, some still in gym shorts from a training run. Phillips cycled through 3 rifles before they all jammed. He pulled out a pistol. Shortly after, he was dead. Matasareanu tried to escape in a stolen truck, but the kill switch was on, and it wouldn't start. SWAT fired under the vehicle, hitting his unprotected legs 29 times. He bled to death before an ambulance arrived. 12 officers and 8 civilians were wounded. Phillips and Matasareanu were the only ones killed. The changes came fast. The Department of Defense sent 600 M16s to the LAPD. AR-15s went into patrol cars across the country. The 1033 program, which let the military send gear to police, had existed for 5 months but was barely used. After North Hollywood, over 8,000 agencies signed up. More than $7 billion in military equipment has been transferred since. Police training changed too. For decades, officers were taught to wait for SWAT. After North Hollywood, first officers on scene were trained to go in. That's still the standard today.